The lawyer slid the transfer agreement across the polished conference table, and my sister's signature forgery was so lazy she hadn't even bothered to copy my mother's distinctive left-handed slant. I stared at the page for a long moment before I said anything. Not because I was shocked. I'd been expecting this moment for 3 weeks, ever since I first noticed the missing ledger from my mother's filing cabinet. I stayed silent because I wanted to watch Amanda's face while she waited for me to fall apart. She didn't get that satisfaction. "You can see it's all in order," Amanda said, her voice bright and practiced, the same tone she used on investors, wedding vendors, and anyone she needed to charm. "Mom wanted this. She told me herself, before she got sick. She always said the business should go to whoever was willing to actually run it day to day." I looked up from the document and met her eyes. "Mom hasn't been able to hold a pen steady since March, Amanda. She has moderate stage dementia. When exactly did she sign this?" "February," Amanda answered a little too quickly. "Before things got bad." I nodded slowly, folded my hands on the table, and said nothing else. Silence, I'd learned a long time ago, was the only language my family truly feared. It didn't accuse. It didn't beg. It simply waited, patient and immovable, for the truth to make someone else uncomfortable enough to speak first. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. 11 years ago, I turned a single struggling bakery my mother ran out of a strip mall storefront into a 12-location regional chain. My mother, Eleanor, spent 30 years kneading dough at 4 in the morning, raising 2 daughters with flour-dusted hands, while keeping a business alive that barely broke even. When I graduated with my business degree, I didn't take the corporate job I'd been offered. I came home. I rebuilt her ovens, renegotiated her leases, and turned Eleanor's kitchen into something that could actually support a family instead of simply feeding one. Amanda had done none of that. She went to art school, dropped out, and spent the next decade drifting between marketing internships and boyfriends with trust funds, always returning to family gatherings with another business idea that needed just a little seed money. My mother gave it to her. Every single time. That was simply how our family worked. Amanda dreamed. I paid. And my mother called it love. 6 months ago, everything changed. My mother suffered a stroke while she was alone in her kitchen. By the time I found her, the damage had already been done. The woman who once managed every invoice for 12 stores from memory now sometimes forgot which daughter she was speaking to. She lived in a quiet memory care facility 40 minutes outside the city. Some days she recognized me immediately. Other days, she looked at me like I was a complete stranger. I had power of attorney for my mother's medical decisions. I did not, however, have sole authority over her ownership stake in the business. At the time, it seemed like a minor legal detail. Later, it would become one of the biggest mistakes I'd ever made. 3 weeks before that meeting, I went to my mother's administrative office at the flagship bakery to retrieve a shipment ledger. I'd done it hundreds of times before. Nothing about that morning felt unusual. Until I opened the filing cabinet. The drawer held all of my mother's original business records, ownership certificates, operating agreements, corporate filings. The documents that proved she and I jointly owned 90% of Eleanor's kitchen, while Amanda held the symbolic 10% my mother had given her years earlier. The folder felt thinner than I remembered. I pulled everything out, looked through it once. Then again. The original ownership certificate was gone. I didn't panic. Panicking had always been Amanda's specialty. Mine was paying attention. Instead of assuming the worst, I started asking questions. There was one person I trusted more than anyone else to give me an honest answer. Mr. Abernathy. For more than 40 years, he'd been the notary public my mother trusted with every important document she'd ever signed. He was 73 years old, meticulous, and as dependable as sunrise. When I called, he recognized my voice immediately. "Sarah," he said warmly, "it's been too long. How's your mother?" "She's stable," I answered. "Mr. Abernathy, I need to ask you something unusual. Has anyone recently come to you, asking to notarize documents on my mother's behalf. Ownership transfers, powers of attorney, anything like that? There was a pause. Not the kind created by uncertainty. The kind that tells you someone already knows the answer. A young woman came in about a month ago, he said carefully. She said she was your sister. She already had the paperwork signed. She only wanted my seal and a witness signature. I told her I don't notarize signatures I haven't personally watched being made. I asked her to bring your mother into the office. And then? I already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. She became upset, he replied. Said your mother wasn't well enough to travel. Claimed it was only a formality. I declined. She left. I assumed that was the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days after that phone call, a certified letter arrived at my house. The return address belonged to a law firm I'd never heard of. Inside was a formal notice stating that my mother, Eleanor Mitchell, had transferred 60% ownership of Eleanor's Kitchen LLC to Amanda Mitchell, effective immediately. According to the paperwork, the transfer had been completed under a notarized power of attorney and ownership agreement dated February 14th. I read every page. Then I read it again. Something wasn't right. I couldn't explain it yet, but I knew it. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table and read the transfer agreement 4 times. At first glance, the signature looked convincing. The loops were close. The overall shape was right. Even the slight tremor that had crept into my mother's handwriting over the past year had been copied. Almost perfectly. But my mother had been left-handed her entire life. Every birthday card she'd written. Every grocery list. Every business document. Her handwriting always leaned backward, toward her own body. It was such a small detail that most people would never notice it. But I'd watched my mother write for nearly 40 years. I knew her handwriting as well as I knew my own. This signature leaned forward. A tiny mistake, almost invisible. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I picked up my phone and called David. He'd been my attorney for years and knew the business almost as well as I did. David, I said, clear your schedule for the next few weeks. He didn't ask many questions. If you're calling me like this, he said, I'm guessing something serious has happened. It has. I'll start making arrangements. When I ended the call, I made one more. Amanda answered almost immediately. You got the paperwork, she said. I did. Another brief silence. Then she asked, So, what now? I'm happy to meet with your lawyer, I said, whenever you're ready. She sounded almost relieved. Tomorrow afternoon? I'll be there. After we hung up, I placed the documents back inside the envelope and sat quietly for a moment. Amanda believed she'd already won. She thought the paperwork was enough. She thought all she had to do was wait for me to give up. But I already knew something she didn't. Mr. Abernathy hadn't just refused to notarize her document. He had kept a copy of it. The conference room was on the 14th floor of a downtown office building. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Cold, recessed lighting. The kind of room designed to make ordinary people feel small. Amanda's attorney, Trent Weller, sat beside her. He was young, impeccably dressed, wore an expensive watch, and had one habit that immediately caught my attention. He clicked his pen whenever he was nervous. Amanda said very little. Mostly, she watched me. She'd always done that. Waiting to see which version of Sarah Mitchell had shown up. As far as my family was concerned, there had always been 2 versions of me. There was Sarah the provider, dependable, generous. The one who wrote the checks, co-signed the loans, and quietly cleaned up everyone else's mistakes. Then there was Sarah the difficult one. The woman who became a problem the moment she asked where the money was going, or why Amanda's name kept appearing on another loan application, or why fairness somehow always seemed to mean giving Amanda more. I'd spent 38 years being told that loving my sister meant absorbing the consequences of her choices without complaint. I think it's important, Trent began, clicking his pen again, that we approach this constructively. Miss Mitchell, Amanda, has been managing your mother's day-to-day affairs for several months now. Grocery runs, doctor's appointments, things like that. It's only natural your mother would want to formalize Amanda's role in the business. Grocery runs, I repeated. She's been very present, he replied. I thought about the 11 years I'd spent waking up at 4:30 every morning whenever a bakery manager called in sick, because I refused to let my mother's business suffer. I thought about the 2 years I'd spent restructuring supplier contracts after the pandemic nearly bankrupted us. I hadn't taken a paycheck for months. Meanwhile, Amanda was posting vacation photos from a beach house in Tulum. I thought about the 4 different times I'd quietly paid her overdue rent so our mother would never have to worry. I said none of it. I'd learned a long time ago that reminding people of your sacrifices rarely changes their minds. It simply gives them another reason to call you bitter, or controlling, or ungrateful. So instead of defending myself, I asked a question. Amanda, I said quietly, where were you on February 14th? She blinked. It lasted less than a second. Most people would never have noticed it. I did. I'd spent my entire childhood watching that exact hesitation before every excuse she'd ever invented. I was with Mom, she answered. At her house. We had a quiet Valentine's dinner, just the 2 of us. I brought the paperwork because a friend helped me prepare it, and Mom wanted to sign everything right then. What friend? She frowned. Does it matter? It matters quite a bit, I replied. Because according to this document, it was prepared for notarization during the very same week you visited Mr. Abernathy's office, asking him to notarize a signature he never witnessed. The color drained from Amanda's face. Only for a moment. Then the confidence returned. I don't know what you're talking about. He remembers you, I said calmly. He remembers refusing you. For the first time since the meeting began. Trent stopped clicking his pen. This is exactly what I mean, Amanda said, her voice rising just enough to draw attention without sounding out of control. You've never trusted me. Not once. Mom is sick, Sarah. She's scared. She needed someone who was actually there for her emotionally, instead of hiding behind spreadsheets and business reports. And instead of appreciating that I stepped up, you're accusing me of forging her signature. She looked directly at me. Do you even hear yourself? I'd seen this performance before, more times than I could count. Amanda had a remarkable ability to take any accusation against her and transform it into evidence that I was the real problem. If I questioned money, I was greedy. If I questioned our mother's safety, I was controlling. If I asked for documentation, I was treating my own family like criminals. The goal was never to answer the question. The goal was to make the question itself feel like the crime. I'd watched my mother fall for that trick for more than 20 years. I wasn't going to fall for it. I'm not accusing you of anything, yet, I said evenly. I'm asking a direct question, and I'd like a direct answer. Did you, or did you not, attempt to have a document notarized at Abernathy Notary Services on January 18th, using a signature you claimed belonged to our mother? Silence. Amanda didn't answer. Trent leaned toward her and whispered something I couldn't hear. Whatever advice he'd just given her, it produced a completely different strategy. I think, he said smoothly, we should focus less on procedural technicalities and more on Eleanor's clearly stated wishes. Eleanor has always wanted both of her daughters taken care of. If there's a disagreement about the notarization process, that's easy enough to fix. We can simply have Eleanor sign the documents again in front of a licensed notary. There it was. The real plan, hidden inside something that sounded almost reasonable. You want to bring my mother, I said slowly, a woman with moderate-stage dementia, into a room and ask her to transfer majority control of an $11 million company, while standing beside the daughter who benefits from that transfer. I looked at both of them. That's what you're proposing. Amanda shook her head. When you say it like that, it sounds sinister. It isn't. She's still our mother. She still has opinions. You don't get to decide she's suddenly incompetent just because it's convenient for your ownership stake. I never said she was incompetent. I kept my voice calm. Her physicians did. There is a formal capacity evaluation in her medical file, completed in April. It concludes that she is not consistently capable of understanding or executing complex financial or legal decisions on days when her symptoms are active. I can have that report subpoenaed before the end of the week. For the first time since I'd walked into that conference room, Amanda had nothing to say. I let the silence remain exactly where it was. Silence has a way of making people reveal what they never intended to say out loud. Eventually, Amanda spoke. You always thought you were better than me. Her voice was quieter now. Smarter. More responsible. More deserving. She looked down at the table. You got the business. You got Mom's approval. You got everything. Then she looked back at me. So tell me, Sarah, was it really so hard to let me have this one thing? Even if I had to take a shortcut, I looked at my sister for a long moment. There was a version of this conversation, years ago, where that sentence might have worked on me, where the guilt embedded in it might have made me quietly withdraw the accusation, sign something, smooth things over the way I always had, because keeping the peace had always felt like my job in this family. But I was thinking about my mother, alone in a memory care facility, unaware that her own daughter had tried to forge her signature while she was too unwell to know the difference. It was never a shortcut, Amanda, I said, standing and gathering my folder. It's fraud, and I intend to prove it. I left the conference room without waiting for Trent's rebuttal, walked past the elevator bank, and did not let my hands shake until I was safely inside my car, alone, 3 floors down in the parking garage, gripping the steering wheel and finally allowing myself to feel, for just a moment, the full weight of what my sister had tried to do. Then I called David. I need everything Abernathy has, I told him. The refused document, his notes, the date he turned her away, and I need it before Amanda has a chance to destroy her copy of whatever she filed with that law firm. On it, David said. Sarah, there's something else you should know. I pulled the county filing this morning while you were in that meeting. What did you find? The transfer agreement wasn't just filed with a private law firm, he said. It was submitted to the state's business registry 3 days ago, requesting formal reissuance of Eleanor's Kitchen LLC's operating documents, listing Amanda as majority owner and managing member. If it processes before we intervene, she gains legal signing authority over every bank account, every lease, every vendor contract the company holds. I sat very still in the driver's seat, watching the gray concrete pillars of the parking garage blur slightly at the edges of my vision. How long do we have? David's voice was steady, the way it always was, but I could hear the edge underneath it. 5 business days, he said. After that, it's not a dispute anymore, Sarah. It's a done deal. 5 business days. I wrote the number on a legal pad and stared at it until the digits stopped looking like numbers and started looking like a countdown clock. I did not spend those 5 days panicking, and I did not spend them confronting Amanda again. Screaming matches were her territory. She was gifted at them, skilled at turning volume into the appearance of righteousness. My territory had always been quieter. Spreadsheets, documentation, the particular kind of patience that comes from having spent a decade renegotiating supplier contracts with men who assumed a woman running a bakery chain could be outweighted. The morning after the meeting, I drove to Abernathy Notary Services before it opened, and sat in my car outside the small brick storefront until I saw Mr. Abernathy unlock the front door at 7:15, exactly on schedule, the way he had every day for 40 years. Sarah, he said, surprised to see me waiting on the sidewalk. You didn't need to come in person. I could have sent the file. I wanted to see it myself, I said, and I wanted to ask you something I should have asked on the phone. He led me into the small back office, all warm wood paneling and filing cabinets that had clearly not been updated since the 1990s, and pulled out a manila folder with my mother's name written on the tab in his careful, old-fashioned handwriting. When Amanda came in, I said, Did she leave anything behind? A copy of the document she wanted notarized? Mr. Abernathy nodded slowly. She left in something of a hurry, after I refused her. She left her copy on the counter. I meant to mail it back, but honestly, given how upset she was, I thought it wiser to simply keep it on file in case something like this ever came up. He slid the folder across the desk. Notaries see a great deal in 40 years, Sarah. We learn to keep records. Inside the folder was the original document Amanda had attempted to have notarized, dated January 18th, not February 14th as she'd claimed in the conference room. The discrepancy alone was damning, but it was the second thing I found in the folder that made my pulse quicken. Stapled to the back of the document was a handwritten sign-in sheet from Mr. Abernathy's front desk, required for every visitor to his office. Amanda's signature was there, in her own handwriting, not our mother's, along with the date, the time, and a notation in Mr. Abernathy's careful hand. Client requested notarization of enclosed POA/transfer document. Declined. Signature not witnessed by this office. Client stated document already signed and became agitated upon refusal. Recommended client return with principal party present. It was a contemporaneous record created in the ordinary course of business by a licensed professional with no personal stake in the outcome. David would later tell me it was exactly the kind of document a fraud case is built on. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just quiet, boring, devastating paperwork. "There's one more thing," Mr. Abernathy said, watching my face as I read. "I called your mother's care facility, discreetly, the week after Amanda visited me. I've known your family a long time, Sarah, and something about the whole encounter didn't sit right with me. I asked the front desk, just as a courtesy, whether Eleanor had left the facility for any outside appointments on January 18th. And she hadn't," he said. "Their visitor and outing logs show your mother did not leave the premises at all that week. She has a documented sign-out procedure for family visits. Every outing is logged, timed, and requires facility staff notification for medical reasons. There's no record of her leaving to meet Amanda anywhere, let alone to sign legal documents." I sat in the quiet of that back office for a long moment, feeling something shift and settle inside my chest. Not triumph exactly, but the particular relief of watching scattered, chaotic fear finally organize itself into something solid enough to fight with. "I'd like copies of everything," I said. "The refused document, the sign-in sheet, and if you're willing, a signed statement describing your interaction with Amanda. I'll have it ready by this afternoon," Mr. Abernathy said. Then, more gently, "Your mother is lucky to have you, Sarah. I hope you know that." I drove straight to David's office from there, the folder sitting on the passenger seat like something radioactive. David spread the documents across his conference table and read through them twice, his expression sharpening with the particular focus I'd come to recognize whenever a case moved from theoretical to provable. "This is good," he said. "This is very good, but we need one more piece before we move, because Amanda's attorney is going to argue that even if this particular attempt failed, she could have gotten a valid signature some other way, on some other day. We need to eliminate that possibility entirely." "How?" "Your mother's facility keeps a full visitor and outing log, correct? Not just for January 18th, for the entire window between whenever Amanda claims this document was actually signed and the date it was filed with the state registry." I understood immediately. "You want the whole timeline. I want to prove that at no point during the alleged signing window did Amanda have unsupervised access to your mother outside of facility oversight," David said. "Because if we can show that every single visit was either supervised by staff, occurred in common areas with witnesses, or simply didn't happen at all, then there is no window in which this signature could have been legitimately obtained. It doesn't just discredit one document, it discredits her entire narrative." That afternoon, I visited the memory care facility myself. Not to see my mother, though I did, sitting with her for 20 quiet minutes while she asked me 3 times whether I'd remembered to feed a dog we'd owned when I was 12, a dog that had been gone for over 2 decades. I held her hand and told her yes, I'd fed him, and watched her face relax with the small, uncomplicated relief of a worry resolved. Then I met with the facility's administrator, a calm, thorough woman named Patricia Alvarez, and formally requested, through proper channels and with my documented power of attorney, a complete copy of my mother's visitor and outing logs for the preceding 4 months. What the logs showed, when David and I laid them out chronologically 2 days later, was this. Amanda had visited our mother a total of 6 times in the 4 months surrounding the alleged signing date. Every single visit had taken place in the facility's shared common room, per policy for all outside guests, with staff periodically present and a facility camera recording the space continuously for resident safety. Not one visit exceeded 40 minutes. Not one outing had ever been logged. There was no world, timeline, or explanation in which Amanda could have privately obtained our mother's uncoerced, competent signature on an $11 million ownership transfer. "We have 5 days until the state registry filing processes," David said, closing the folder with quiet satisfaction. "I think we can do considerably better than simply stopping it in time, Sarah. I think we can end this permanently, and in a way that leaves your sister no room left to maneuver. What did you have in mind?" David allowed himself the smallest, driest smile I'd seen from him in the 11 years he'd represented my family. "We're not going to fight this quietly through correspondence," he said. "We're going to file an emergency injunction with the state registry, supported by Mr. Abernathy's sworn statement and the facility's records, halting the ownership transfer before it processes. And then, once that's secured, we're going to request a formal fraud investigation, which means Amanda won't just lose the business. She'll have to answer, under oath, for every single detail of a story that the evidence proves, point by point, never happened." I thought of Amanda across that glass conference table, chin lifted, so certain that charm and family guilt would carry her through, the way it always had. "When does the injunction file?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," David said. "First thing." I nodded, gathered the folder of evidence, and drove home in the deepening dark, past the flagship bakery my mother had built from nothing, its windows warmly lit, the ovens still running the late shift, entirely unaware that by this time next week, the fight for its ownership would be over for good. The emergency injunction was filed at exactly 9:14 the following morning. David called me the moment confirmation came through, his voice carrying the calm confidence of a man who had done this exact maneuver 100 times before. "The registry's compliance office froze the transfer pending review," he said. "As of right now, ownership of Eleanor's Kitchen LLC remains exactly as it was before Amanda ever walked into that notary's office. Nothing has changed hands, and nothing will until this is resolved." "And the fraud complaint?" "Filed alongside it," he said, supported by Mr. Abernathy's statement, the facility logs, and the forensic handwriting comparison. I had an examiner run overnight. She confirmed what you already knew. The signature's directional pressure and slant are inconsistent with a left-hand dominant writer. It's not just circumstantial anymore, Sarah. It's documented. I didn't feel triumphant when I hung up the phone. Mostly, I felt exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes after holding your breath longer than you realized. I made a cup of tea, sat at my kitchen table, and allowed myself exactly 10 minutes of silence before my phone began ringing. It was Amanda. I let it ring out. She called 4 more times over the next hour. Then, finally, a text message appeared. "We need to talk. Now." I agreed to meet her, but not at her apartment, not at mine, and not at the office. I chose a quiet cafe 2 blocks from David's building, public enough that neither of us would dare raise our voices. She was already seated when I arrived. For a moment, I barely recognized her. The polished confidence she'd worn in the conference room was gone. She looked tired in a way I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. "You froze the filing," she said before I'd even sat down. "I did. Do you have any idea what you've done? A fraud investigator called me this morning, Sarah. An actual investigator. Do you understand what that means for me? For my life?" I sat across from her and folded my hands on the table. "I understand exactly what it means," I said. "It means you'll have the opportunity to explain, under oath, why you told a licensed notary that a document was already signed by our mother, when the facility's records prove she was never given the opportunity to sign anything. Amanda's jaw tightened. For a moment, I expected the tears, the accusations, the familiar performance. Instead, she simply looked down. I didn't think it would go this far, she said quietly. I thought if I got the paperwork done, you'd be angry for a while, and then it would just become normal, the way things always do. You'd absorb it, like you absorb everything. That's the part you got wrong, I said. I've spent my whole life absorbing things to keep this family from falling apart. I paid your rent 4 times and never told Mom. I co-signed things I never should have. I stayed quiet every time you were praised for effort you never actually made, because keeping the peace always seemed easier. But this isn't another unpaid bill, Amanda. This is our mother's life's work. And you tried to take it while she was too sick to understand what you were doing. I needed the money, she whispered. The restaurant investment collapsed. I'm $80,000 in debt. I panicked. I thought if I could gain majority control, I could refinance against the company's assets and fix everything before anyone noticed. There it was. The truth. Not fairness. Not love. Not our mother's wishes. Just debt. Fear. And desperation. You could have told me, I said softly. I would have helped you find a real solution. A payment plan. A legitimate loan. Anything honest. Instead, you chose to forge Mom's name. Amanda looked at me with tears in her eyes. Because you always made me feel like I'd failed, she said. Maybe not on purpose, but you built something incredible, and I built nothing. I couldn't stand asking you for help one more time. I sat quietly. There was truth buried inside her words. But understanding why someone breaks the law doesn't erase what they did. I'm not withdrawing the complaint, I said gently. The investigation will continue. What I can do is make sure your cooperation is taken into account. If you're honest, if you make full restitution, if you agree never to attempt anything like this again. Amanda wiped her eyes. Why would you still protect me? Because you're my sister, I answered. Not because you've earned it today, but because I still remember the girl who was afraid of the dog on Maple Street and who held my hand all the way to school. But Amanda, you have to change. Not apologize. Change. She nodded. For the first time, I wasn't looking at an enemy. I was looking at someone who had confused desperation with entitlement, and had finally been forced to face the difference. The investigation moved forward exactly as David predicted. Amanda cooperated once her attorney reviewed the evidence, and realized there was no case left to fight. She entered a formal restitution agreement, repaid the legal costs, and signed a permanent acknowledgement barring her from holding signing authority over the company's accounts without my written consent. The state registry officially voided the ownership transfer. Eleanor's kitchen remained exactly where it had always belonged. With my mother, and with me. 3 weeks later, I sat beside my mother's bed in the memory care facility on one of her better days. She smiled at me. How's the business, sweetheart? It's safe, Mom, I said. It's exactly where you left it. She smiled, squeezed my hand, and closed her eyes to rest. I stayed there a little longer, watching the warm afternoon sunlight fill the room. Some kinds of love are loud. Some are easy, but the ones that last are often quiet, patient, protected not by promises, but by the courage to do the right thing, even when the person you're protecting never knows you had to. Autumn came slowly that year, the way it always does in the weeks after something breaks, and then, carefully, begins to heal. I found myself standing in the flagship bakery more often than usual in those months, not because there was anything urgent to manage, but because the smell of proofing dough at 5 in the morning had become, somewhere over 11 years, the closest thing I had to a form of prayer. Amanda and I did not return to what we had been before. I want to be honest about that, because there is a temptation, at the end of stories like this one, to tie every loose thread into forgiveness, so complete it erases the damage that came before it. That isn't what happened, and I don't think it should have. What happened instead was slower and more honest. Amanda completed the restitution agreement in full. She sold the small stake she'd once dismissively called her symbolic 10%, not out of punishment, but because she told me, quietly, over coffee one gray November morning, that she didn't think she deserved to hold it anymore, not after what she'd tried to take by force, instead of asking for honestly. She used the proceeds to pay down a portion of her debt and enrolled, of all things, in a financial counseling program our mother's own accountant recommended. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was just the slow, unglamorous work of a person trying to become someone their family could trust again. I don't know yet whether she'll fully get there. Trust, once it's been forged, in every sense of that word, doesn't rebuild itself on the same schedule as a legal settlement. But I keep the door open, a little, because closing it entirely never felt like justice to me. It felt like giving up on the possibility that people can, eventually, become more than the worst thing they've done. My mother never learned the full details of what Amanda attempted. David and I made the deliberate decision to shield her from it, not out of dishonesty, but out of mercy. She had built something extraordinary out of a strip mall storefront and 30 years of 4 a.m. mornings, and I wasn't willing to let her final clear memories of that legacy be tangled up with the knowledge that one of her daughters had tried to steal it from her while she was too unwell to stop it. Some truths are for the people strong enough to carry them, not the people who deserve to be protected from them. I visit her every Sunday. Some Sundays she knows exactly who I am, asks precise questions about quarterly revenue the way she used to when I was 27, and terrified of failing her. Other Sundays, she asks about a dog that's been gone for 20 years, and I answer gently, and hold her hand, and let her live in whatever version of time feels safest to her that day. The bakery is still hers, in every way that matters. I simply keep it standing. Lessons from this story. Lesson 1. Protecting what you love sometimes requires documentation, not confrontation. For years, I believed that loyalty meant absorbing conflict quietly, smoothing things over, so the people I loved never had to face consequences. What I learned, in the end, is that real protection, of a business, a parent, a legacy, often looks less like a dramatic stand and more like a filing cabinet. The people who care most about preserving something precious are usually the ones willing to do the boring, patient work of keeping records nobody else thought to keep. Lesson 2. Desperation and entitlement can wear the same face, and only patience reveals the difference. Amanda's forgery wasn't born from malice alone. It was born from years of debt, shame, and a genuine belief that she couldn't ask for help without losing whatever dignity she had left. That doesn't excuse what she did, but understanding it taught me that the people who hurt us most are rarely simple villains. They are often frightened people who chose the fastest exit instead of the honest one, and recognizing that difference is what allowed me to seek accountability without seeking cruelty. Lesson 3. A family system that only rewards the loudest voice will eventually punish the quietest one. For most of my life, my silence was mistaken for consent, my competence for endless capacity, and my steadiness for a lack of needs of my own. It took watching my sister try to forge our mother's signature for me to understand that being the reliable one in a family is not the same as being seen by that family. Boundaries, I learned, are not betrayals. They are simply the truth, finally spoken out loud. Lesson 4. Justice and mercy are not opposites. They can be the same decision, made in the correct order. I did not withdraw the fraud complaint. I did not pretend the forgery hadn't happened, or smooth it over the way our family always smoothed over Amanda's choices. But I also chose, once accountability was secured, to leave a door open for the sister underneath the desperation. Real strength, I've come to believe, isn't choosing between holding someone accountable and still loving them. It's learning how to do both, in the right order, without letting either one erase the other.